Hey, everybody. Welcome to our first Firelight Chat. This, of course, the name is an homage to Franklin Roosevelt and his fireside chats. Sometimes people will say to me, Marianne, people tell me they want to know what your campaign stands for. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could just say to people, well, she talks every Wednesday night, every Sunday night, and you can hear what she's talking about, what her campaign is about, what the issues are that she cares about. So this is our first one. On Wednesdays, I will interview people who are living the issues, the stories that seem important to me, that this campaign concerns itself with, and that my presidency would concern itself with. That's number one. And then on Sunday nights, we will do Ask Me Anything, and you can see all over my social media places where you can post your questions. I want to start tonight by talking about the basic principles on which this campaign is based. There is a document, and it is one of the most profound spiritual as well as political documents ever to arrive on the planet. And it's called our Declaration of Independence. Why do I say that this is a spiritual document? Well, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now, that's not normally what we would think of as a political statement. All men are created equal. And then the second self-evident truth is that God gave unalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness to all men. And then there are two other principles in the Declaration that are radical. They were radical in 1776. And the whole point of this campaign, in a way, is that they're radical today. Because the third principle is that governments are instituted to secure those rights. That's the purpose of government, to secure our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And number four, that if the government is not doing its job, it's the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. The Declaration of Independence is like America's mission statement. President John Adams said he hoped that every July 4th we would revisit first principles. These are the principles on which we purport to stand. These are the principles that are America's North Star. And when we align ourselves and our policies with those principles, we do well as a nation. When we deviate from those principles, we falter. And we're faltering now. But I want to tell you how I see that dichotomy between the principles and how we sometimes behave. That dichotomy is baked into the cake. It was with us from the very beginning. America's story is contained in that document because of the 56 men who signed it. And by signing that document, they were committing treason against the King of England. If the British had won the war, they would have been executed. Out of that 56 men who signed the document, 41 of them were slave owners. So from the very, very beginning, there has been this dichotomy between the principles on which we purport to stand and the fact that within every generation from the very, very beginning, there had been those who usually for their own ideological or financial or both purposes had no intention whatsoever of seeing those principles made manifest. And that is the struggle at the heart of the American story. It has always been with us, and every generation lives its own iteration of it. It is as true today as it has ever been. So at the beginning, you had the fact that this incredible document, enlightened document, was signed by people, some of whom were slave owners, and slavery did exist. But over time, America has tended to self-correct. So we responded to slavery with abolition. We responded to the institutionalized suppression of women with the women's suffrage movement, the passage of the 19th Amendment. We responded to the first Gilded Age with the emergence of the labor movement. We responded to segregation with the civil rights movement. It's that line about the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But we, the citizens of the United States, have to be the benders. We have to bend that arc. And what's happening in our country today is that we're living out this same stuff once more. There are those of us who want to see equality of all Americans, who really understand no matter who we are. That's been the journey, is to understand not just white, also black, brown, any other color, not just men, also women, not just straight, also gay, not just one gender, also whatever anybody else identifies themselves as. that if you're an American, that it is a principle on which we agree to agree that all men are created equal, all people are created equal, and that God gave all people inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Today, those principles are challenged, and they've been challenged before, and it's our turn. Now it's our generation's turn to repudiate the forces that would destroy them. In fact, Abraham Lincoln described the Declaration of Independence, saying that it is a stumbling block and a rebuke to tyranny and oppression. It seems to me that part of the problem is that too many of us have lost our emotional connection to the principles that truly are what make this country exceptional. It's the principles themselves, but if you have an exceptional generation, you can't just say, well, my parents were exceptional, so I'm exceptional. Each of us has to rediscover, and each generation has to make manifest in our time the principles on which we purport to stand. So today, what we have are economic principles that see people as data, see people as consumers, that have deviated so much from the humanitarian values of the Declaration of Independence. So what I want this campaign to magnify is the realignment of public policy with the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And the oppression of our time, the main tyranny of our time, is economic. Now, how did we respond as a country to the first Gilded Age? One aspect of the response was the emergence of the labor movement. And what is going on today is a second Gilded Age, and the response is the reemergence of the labor movement. We have to have an inside-outside strategy in terms of healing this country. There has to be electoral politics involved, and there also has to be movement politics. And no movement is more important than organized labor. And part of the way that this transfer of wealth and power was effectuated was through the demonization of labor. But it's back, and you might have seen on my podcast when I interviewed Christian Smalls and when I interviewed baristas from Starbucks. Today, I want to talk to a couple of people who are part of the writers' strike. On one hand, the writers' strike is just like all these other labor movements right now, in which workers are rising up. They're tired of being exploited. They don't understand why this paradigm of trickle-down economics should continue to oppress them, because it is oppressive. It's the idea that you just move all the wealth creation into the hands of a tiny few people, into the hands of the stockholders, that you just forget the rest of the stakeholders, like they don't matter. And the stakeholders, of course, are the workers. The stakeholders, of course, are the planet. The stakeholders are the animals, the people, the communities, and so forth. That's why we need this economic U-turn, and why the agenda of my campaign is that we are offering to the American people that economic U-turn. So I have a couple of men who are here with me today who I want to interview and ask about their experience of the writers' strike. Before I bring them on, though, I want to read you some things. I don't want to get the words wrong, so I want to make sure that you're very clear about what's going on with the writers' strike. We're now more than 1 month into the WGA strike. It began on May 2nd. The Writers Guild of America is in a stalemate with television, film, and streaming studios over job security and pay. WGA members are hoping for a new contract offering higher wages, more residuals, regulations on AI, and guaranteed staffing minimums, among other demands. And all of that will be explained in the interview that you're about to see. Per the New York Times, this is a great quote: "The dispute pits 11,500 television and screenwriters against the major studios." So in the case of the writers' strike, it's these major studios that hold all this power. According to CNBC, the top Hollywood executive made $498 million in the last 5 years, and that's 384 times as much as the average writer. So once again, what's happening with the writers' strike, what's happening with writers saying, hey, I need to make my living this way. I need to have dignity in the workplace. This has got to be something more than just using people so that, a few people at the top can make a lot of money. This has got to be a society, not just one industry or another industry, but a society in which people who work for a living matter, in which our dignity, our ability to survive, our ability to make a living by which to support our families is sacrosanct, and by which it's seen as part of the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we need to remember it is government's job. Governments are instituted to secure those rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the ability of people to self-actualize, the ability of people to soar, the ability of people to do that which not enough Americans can do today. And that's not be always in chronic economic anxiety and survival mode. In the richest country in the world, you shouldn't have 70% of us, as CNBC now says, who live chronic economic stress. We talk about the mental health crisis. You cannot overestimate the role that economic anxiety is playing in so much of the anxiety and the mental health crisis that people are experiencing today. I understand that. It's one of the reasons I'm running for president. So I hope you'll enjoy these Firelight Chats. These are the issues that I care about. These are the kind of people I'll be listening to. We can turn this thing around. As I have already said, what's so fascinating about the writer's strike is that it has to do with storytellers. It has to do with writers. And these are people who understand so well and can articulate so well the larger story, not only of what is happening in the American economy, what is happening, what are the issues of hypercapitalism, what are the issues of the exploitation of workers, not just what is happening in this particular situation, but what the larger story means. So who better to tell us than the storytellers? And we have two great ones here with us today. So gentlemen, thank you very, very much for being with us and helping us to understand this issue a little more deeply. I want to introduce both of these gentlemen to you, and then we'll go right into conversation. The first is actually my cousin-in-law, Jay Kogan. Jay Kogan was one of the original writers of The Simpsons, went on to write Frasier, Everybody Loves Raymond, Malcolm in the Middle, and many more for the last 35 years. As you can imagine, he's funny. He's on the board of several charities, teaches at the John Wells Division of Writing at USC School of Cinematic Arts. He has a new podcast about fighting loneliness in the modern world, which I didn't know, Jay, called Don't Be Alone with Jay Kogan. Also, Billy Ray. Thank you very much, Billy, for being here. Billy wrote, directed, and executive produced Showtime's The Comey Rule, which had the biggest debut of any limited series in that network's history. Ray's films as writer, co-writer, or writer-director include The Hunger Games, Richard Jewell, Shattered Glass, and Breach. He serves on the boards of Common Defense and Big Sunday, and currently co-hosts a podcast about the WGA strike called Strike Talk. Gentlemen, thank you so much. So grateful that you are here. When did all of this start? Was this been a gradual thing? Did you tell me about the beginnings of your careers as writers? What was the trajectory that you saw happen in Hollywood that brought us to this point?
Okay. Well, I mean, show business looked like one thing when we started, and it looks completely different now. In the way that movies and TV shows were made, they're big staffs, a large middle class of writers who worked. There was people were able to make a living writing as doing rewrites in movies and rights of movies and TV show staffs and pilots, and there was an economy that allowed us to thrive, and that economy has slowly been whittled away as giant corporations have eaten each other, and every quarter they're looking to save profits and looking to make more money, but ignoring the quality of the thing that they're foisting on the American people. So to me, I see the staffs have gotten much smaller. The orders of shows have gotten much smaller. The pay of writers have gotten much smaller, and things are minimum. Writers don't even get to stay on the entire run of the show anymore. They used to be from the beginning to the end. Writers were there for every bit of it, and now the companies don't think that's important. They don't think it's important that writers be there for the writing, and it's shocking, and it's a strange number crunching that actually corporations do that. They're going to eat themselves, and in the same time, they're going to destroy our infrastructure and our careers while they do it.
About what year was it when you started saying to yourself, "Oh, this is a problem. This is a systemic fundamental change about when did it, I mean, I assume these things started happening and you were like, well, you know, they're a bunch of jerks. And then it got to a point where, no, this is not just bad behavior. This is a systemic malevolence.
There used to be a thing called FinCEN, which meant financial syndication. And essentially the FinCEN rules said that a TV network could not also be a studio. In other words, studios would produce television and then license an episode of television to networks, to ABC, CBS, NBC, and the network would be allowed to run it once and then rerun it once, but they didn't own it. The studio owned it. Once the United States government decided to abolish the FinCEN regulations, networks could become studios. And it was the beginning of the end, because it was, look, for me, this strike is the front line in a much, much larger battle that has to do with the corporatization of America, the dignity of work, the worth of the individual. These are big pictures that are way beyond, you know, just us little old writers. But it all started with the repeal of FinCEN, late 80s, early 90s. And what you've seen is a systemic conglomeration in the same way that family farms get eaten up by big ag, and all of a sudden family farmers can't make a go of it anymore because they can't compete. What you're seeing is a concentration of power in fewer and fewer hands, so that now there are essentially 5 companies against whom we're negotiating who produce 95% of the media consumed by the world. That's a pretty staggering number. And it's a big entity for us to be taking on. I was, through Guild leadership, I was co-chair of the negotiating committee 3 times, in 2011, 2014, 2017. And what I saw in those negotiations was exactly what I'm seeing now. And it's really important to me that your listeners, viewers understand this strike is not about fairness. Most people rightly believe they are not treated fairly. This strike is about extinction. This is literally about not just the survival of writers, which is, of course, of personal interest to me and to Jay, but it is about the survival of our business. Because if the companies do what they are actually trying to do, they will destroy writing as a profession, and with it, they will destroy the economic engine that made those companies so rich in the first place. So in an odd way, I realize this is a long answer, we are trying to save the business from the people who own it.
Yeah, it's 100% true.
Well, this is an age-old problem, isn't it? The power of the owner versus the power of the worker. And as you said, this is not just in your business, it's in business after business after business. This is what trickle-down economics does. As soon as you start saying that what matters most is the financial gain of the stockholder, as opposed to all the other stakeholders, recognizing that the worker is the primary stakeholder, other than the CEO.
Of course.
Or the customer. I mean, even the product. Like if you put the product first, we would win. If you put the idea of what the company is making first, we'd win. If it was not just about the stockholders and the price and the share and the quarterly report, we'd win.
I think that's a really good point, Jay. And I would also say that, you know, in 1942, right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, everyone was afraid that Los Angeles would be next. And there was a Lockheed plant right down the street from the Warner lot. And so Jack Warner, who owned Warner Brothers, had his painters go up on the soundstage roof and paint a giant arrow pointing towards Lockheed that said Lockheed that-a-way, so that his soundstage wouldn't get bombed, but the people who were actually building the planes that would defend America and Jack Warner would all die in a fiery, hellish death. Okay. In other words, the idea was protect the company at all costs, even at the risk of damaging America. And what we're seeing, there's a thing in Silicon Valley, a word I truly hate, called optimization. What optimization means is that profit above all else is prized. Less humanity, more production. And so we are now, one of the things that we're fighting against hardest in this strike is not just wages, it's not just minimums and residuals and span of work. It's not that stuff. It's all important, but we're fighting against AI because we are now seeing a technology growing inside our business that is designed to replace writers. That's literally right. To replace writers. So we'll get to a point where Jay or I will go sell a show to a streamer, and that streamer, instead of hiring 6 writers to help us break that show and create a season of television, that streamer will put us in a room with AI, and AI will write 6 or 8 lousy scripts then someone like Jay or me will come rewrite them so that the network, the streamer, gets 8 scripts written by the showrunner, Jay or me or Greg Berlanti or Shonda Rhimes or Sean Ryan or what have you, and they will have paid no other writers. So the cost is absolutely minimized. The production is absolutely optimized. We've now taken 8 writers out of the equation, which means they can't contribute. They don't make any money and can't contribute to the pension or health plans of the WGA, which means the WGA folds. And as Jay says, if we're really worried about the product, is that how you get the best show on the air? And more, when it's time in season 2 or season 3 of that show to turn it over to some writer, no one's been trained in how to tell that story or how to make an hour of television. So we are literally killing the economic engine.
Yeah, I remember reading Andrew Yang's book, War on Normal People, and that was during the last presidential campaign. And I thought the book was very interesting, and it brought up a lot of things that I hadn't thought about. And he talked about, at one part of the book, he said, you probably think it couldn't take over your business. And I thought to myself, he said, you think, look at this picture. He said, this is a painting by Leonardo da Vinci. Now look at what AI did. He said, you probably think if you're this white collar thing or this whatever profession, oh, they couldn't replace me, but it's coming after everyone, because there's a monstrous nature to that kind of profit maximization, optimization, profit at all costs. Let's go back a little bit to just the dignity of the individual worker. It's not just the economic engine of the United States, it's our lives.
That's right.
So explain, I think when you were talking before, Jay, when you were saying that it used to be that a writer would be on the show the whole time. And now, oh, we only need you for act 1, scene 2, and then you can leave and then come back. Well, we'll need you in act 3 for, right, scene 1 or whatever. This has taken away from people the ability to think of writing as a career, and it becomes just a gig. Explain more of that.
Well, I mean, you get hired for a certain amount on the contract, a certain amount of weeks or a certain amount of episodes. And the more they can limit that, the more money they save. And so writers traditionally made money from the beginning of pre-production to the very end of post-production. And we were on shows that were 22 episodes, and so people made money per episode for many, many weeks, and they took a summer break. Now people are on for 6 episodes and not the whole time. And people have to jump to try and find another job and like 3 jobs to actually make a year's worth of income. Otherwise they need a day job. Now that's sort of the gig economy version of writing. And it's hard to sustain really smart, intelligent people who could make money elsewhere to stay here and struggle all the time, instead of going to where Goldman Sachs or wherever they could have gone. A lot of people came from Harvard Law to go write on comedy shows. They're now considering going back to what they were doing as lawyers, because even though it's not fun or not doesn't help their heart, it helps their pocketbook. And this is a big problem, and it's a problem that's getting worse and worse as time goes on. So the less people work, the shorter periods of time, the more everyone's struggling. And it's very interesting now, when we went on strike, a lot of people went on strike. Last time we were on strike, people were wiped out. They were many jobs and money was lost by a lot of rich people. It's still happening now. People who are very successful are going to lose a lot of money, but less people I know are in that position. Many more people are in the position of, well, I guess it doesn't matter a little bit. We're still going to be struggling 4 months. We're going month to month to month to month. So let's have a strike.
You know what? I want to back that up with some numbers, if you don't mind.
Yes.
The last time that I was the co-chair of the negotiating committee was 2017, as I mentioned. At that point, 33% of all TV writers in the Guild were working at scale, essentially at minimum, okay, which is what the Guild negotiates. We don't negotiate over scale. Well, now it is 6 years later, and 50% of all TV writers are now working at scale. We're going in very, very much the wrong direction. And by the way, this optimization idea doesn't just impact writers. Look at the actors. Look at SAG, which just voted overwhelmingly to approve a strike vote. Here are some numbers that are sort of dazzling. In order to qualify for SAG's health plan, an actor needs to make $26,470 a year acting, okay? Pretty low bar. Only 12.7% of all SAG members hit it in a given year. 12.7, which means, doing the math, 87.3% of all SAG members don't have health care. This is not a number that's going to shock you, Marianne. I know the work that you do, but in a recent poll, 71% of Americans said that they believe they don't matter.
That's right.
That desire to matter is part of our DNA. We are born with it. And if we don't matter, if that need goes unmet, then you got someone walking into a school with an AR-15 saying, "Oh, I don't matter, watch this." Boom. You have society crumbling. That need to matter is essential in humans. And right now, corporations are telling workers, no, you don't. They're confirming everyone's worst fear. It's cataclysmic.
That's what the deeper existential problem is. We have acquiesced at this point to an economic system that treats people like they don't matter. Correct. The dignity of human work doesn't matter. They can't quantify it and put it on their data sheet. How much despair that puts people in. Living a livable wage. You can't make a living wage if you have to just work a little bit and it's a gig economy. Then, like you said, you have to go get another job, and people working 2 or 3 jobs because what they have does not support them, does not support their family. It puts everybody in survival mode, psychologically and emotionally, even if not economically. It turns us into a kind of dog eat dog world, and then we wonder why people are depressed. We wonder why people are anxious. We wonder why people aren't building community, having the depth of relationship with their own families and their neighbors that we want. And like you said, we're seeing a tremendous breakdown in society. And what I think these strikes are doing is forcing people to see that these are economic issues. And like you said, this is because we've adopted this kind of hyper-capitalistic, squeezing the money for the stockholders at all costs, at the expense of the other stakeholders, the work, the community, the worker, et cetera. I want to ask you a question, Jay, because I'm interested in the timeline, and I wasn't surprised at all what you were saying. You started noticing things were sort of going south in this area about the late 80s, you said? Is that what you said?
That's what Billy said, but it's, I agree with him. It's the 80s, the 90s, it sort of exponentially increased in the last 5 to 6 years. I mean, just in terms of visibly seeing productions, sizes change and orders change, and all the move from broadcast television to streaming, the move from broadcast to cable to streaming, and syndication, the lack of syndication and everything changing, all that sort of came to a head between our last strike and this strike.
And there's a bigger picture here too, Marianne, which is that it used to be that the companies that made movies were peopled by movie people. When it started, it was, Louis Mayer and Zanuck and the Warner Brothers. They may have been pricks, but they were movie people. They knew that the product had to be great in order for their company to thrive. We are now in a world in which tech companies have gone into the entertainment industry, not to make the entertainment industry better, but to increase their size as a cloud service or to sell more toothbrushes. And so what you have is a group of legacy media companies, Warner's, Universal, Paramount, Sony, Disney, who are really in the entertainment business. They all of a sudden saw what Netflix was doing. Netflix came in and decided to just outspend everybody and create a model in which they just kept getting more and more market share, even though they weren't yet profitable. And Wall Street rewarded them. And since that's what matters, the companies decided to chase Netflix off that cliff. They decided to spend an insane amount on television. The cost of producing an hour of television right now is 50% higher than it was 10 years ago. 50%. Imagine if the cost of cars went up 50% in 10 years. During that same period, TV writer pay has gone down by 24%. So they're clearly not spending it on us. They're spending it on they want to be Game of Thrones.
Right.
But the problem is that they have now all chased Netflix off of that cliff. They've overspent themselves. They all have a market cap that's in the red. They're all in massive debt. And they've decided that rather than no longer competing with Apple, Amazon, and Netflix, who are their natural enemies, they've decided instead, and who want to put them out of business, by the way, they've decided instead to partner with Apple, Amazon, and Netflix in driving down the cost of actors, writers, and directors, which is insane, bad business, and bad math and bad economics.
So we can hear your stories, and we've all heard the stories of what happened to Amazon. We've heard the stories of what's happening at Starbucks. We understand the problem in your specific business. Now, I want to ask you, as Americans, when did it start occurring to you, oh, this is a bigger problem than just my business? This is, oh my God, what is it going to do to this country? What was your own internal awakening to make you, it's a radicalizing thing when you understand that
somebody. Okay, can I do that one first?
Yeah.
It happened for me in 1980, when the second Ronald Reagan said, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" Not, "Are we better off now than we were 4 years ago?" but encouraging a selfishness of political thought, encouraging a tribalism, so that people stopped thinking about the robustness of the American community as a whole and started thinking about their own particular demographic or economic category or gender or what have you. I think that was the beginning of the end. I think that changed the nature of politics, which then changed the nature of policy and legislation and led us to this place. And Reagan, of course, famously, having been a union president, became a union buster, a deregulator, took out, the PATCO workers. I think we've been on this slide since then, by the way, through Democratic and Republican presidents. But we have been on this slide since 1980 in my
the Republicans started it, but no Democratic president stopped it. And of
Correct.
course, during the 1980s, Ivan Boesky's famous line, "Greed is good." So you started realizing, and then that was what was so interesting, because I agree with you, that's when all this started. And then, Jay, you said
Ronald Reagan, I was going to say Ronald Reagan for a completely other reason. Trickle-down economics, for the shrinking government is bad, and must be shrunken down, and trickle-down economics is good. And so let's reward the rich and shrink down public services. So we both have a Ronald Reagan issue, but he sort of, he set the tone for the next 40 years of people saying, okay, government can't work and it shouldn't work and we shouldn't try to work, and we should depend everything on large corporations and give them more and more power to save us. And of course, that's a terrible idea. And we're now in this predicament where the corporations are doing what they do, which is trying to maximize profit, and the government has been shrunken down and sort of handicapped in a million different ways. And nobody's willing to tax the rich to actually save infrastructure and save the ways that people educate themselves and take care of themselves in healthcare and all those things. So we're generally screwed.
Okay, and since 1980, $50 trillion has moved from the bottom 90% in our country to the richest 1% in our country, the biggest migration of wealth in human history. So what's the result? Well, for one thing, the result is if you lined up every American of military age eligibility, 74% of them could not get into the military because they couldn't pass the physical or can't read at a 6th grade level. That's where we are as a country. Why Democrats never talk about health and education as national security issues is totally beyond me, because they completely impact our military preparedness.
Yeah. So in other words, what I hear both of you saying is that your own personal circumstances, what you saw in your own business, went hand in hand with a kind of political awakening and radicalization, where you realized that this is a systemic issue, that it involves the way our economy is moving. This is not just your personal situation.
You see it everywhere we go. Absolutely. And people, the economy depends a lot on people just having a passion and caring about their work. The corporations are using us for as an example to say, we know we won't give you the resources you need to make a good TV show, but we know that you'll move heaven and earth to make sure that you make a good TV show. If you have to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to get it done, even though we haven't given you enough people, you'll do it because you care that much. Well, that's very true for writers. We're not going to let our shows die. We're going to do whatever it takes, even though we're getting screwed. And I think that's maybe true for a lot of people who are working in other industries too. They care about what they do. They want the pride of what they do. And the corporations are using our spirits against us.
You know what, Marianne, I also think part of this, I've had to recognize my own hubris in this, and it's been kind of a painful process. And by that, I mean, when I saw bank tellers disappear and ATMs show up, I knew a lot of people were suffering, but I didn't complain. And when I saw gas station attendants disappear and I started paying at the pump, I didn't like it, but I didn't complain. Now I start to see grocery store clerks vanish as I'm scanning my own groceries. I'm not complaining because I thought they'd never come for me. Well, okay, that's hubris. Now they're coming for writers. And all of a sudden I'm saying, wow, AI is a problem.
Yeah.
That's on me.
Right.
And this will be a fight for the rest of my life. I know it. And I will be fighting for the truck drivers, 3.6 million of them in America who are going to be displaced if we have driverless trucks. I'll be fighting for the school teachers that are going to get displaced. By the way, I'll be fighting for the directors who are going to get displaced and the CEOs who are going to get displaced, because AI can do all of their jobs. AI is a brilliant problem solver. And it's only now that I'm realizing there's a fire under all of us. And that's why I feel this is the front line in a bigger fight.
I'm very glad to hear you say that, because I do think a lot of people look at the writer's strike and think, oh, you want me to feel sorry for you? Because they feel that their problems have been much worse, much earlier. People whose careers really were canaries in the coal mine, and we weren't listening. You're absolutely correct. So let me ask you a question. I spent a lot of years in Los Angeles. How has this affected the sort of feel of the city? Is there this sense of sort of emotional civil war between the bosses and everybody else? What's going on?
People are with us. People are with us, with the Writers Guild, in a way that they've never been with us before. Other unions are with us. Crew members who we're putting out of work call me and say, we're with you. We understand that our jobs are on the line too. Everybody seems to be connected. Executives I know from the corporations they work for are with us, saying they're scared too. They're scared of what's happening to their industry. They're scared of not being able to make a product. There's a lot of people who are with us. So I don't feel there's a civil war going on. I really feel like people are united against one huge problem.
Yeah, and a few individuals are just hiding behind their walls and not coming out a lot. They're not at Craig's this
We're
week. Out
every day picketing. The writers are picketing every day. We're not sitting on our asses. We're picketing. We're showing that our resolve, and people are joining us and giving us food and giving us compliments. People aren't throwing rocks at us. It's very nice.
Well, it's part of a larger resurgence of the labor movement and the realization that this is not just about writers, as you said. It's not just about baristas. It's not just about.
I walk with baristas. Baristas are on the picket line with me.
Exactly.
Baristas are.
There's a famous story. Henry Ford II, son of noted anti-Semite Henry Ford I, was walking through the Ford Cleveland plant with Walter Reuther, who was the famous president of the United Auto Workers. This was 1954. And they passed a spot where machines were doing jobs that humans had been doing just a year before. And because he was an insufferable prick, Henry Ford II said to Walter, gee, Walter, I wonder how you're going to get union dues out of those robots. And Walter Reuther famously responded, gee, Henry, I wonder how many of them are going to buy Fords. And that's sort of the point. Like, yeah, short term makes a lot of sense to replace people with AI. Long term, who's your business? Who is your customer now? Who's going to buy everything? If you destroy the American middle class, who's going to buy American products? We used to be an exporter nation. We're an importer nation now. Well, and one of the last things we export is show business, the American ideal that we broadcast to the rest of the world. You kill this business, what is it that we are actually building for the rest of the world? Nothing. Well,
and the irony of what you said, if people are forced into such survival mode economically, they can't afford to buy the products to begin with. So they're defeating themselves. You mentioned Walter Reuther. I read an incredible book last year called No Ordinary Time about Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor during the Depression and the war. And Reuther was good friends with Eleanor. And what a fascinating man he was.
That guy got equal pay for women in 1936. In the depths of the Depression, Walter Reuther got equal pay for women. He once demanded a contract of GM where he said, I want you to raise our pay by 30%. And part of the contract was, you can't raise the price of a single car. He saw the union movement not as a narrow interest, but as part of a larger holistic picture about social justice. He railed against racism and apartheid. He marched with King from Selma to Montgomery.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's who Walter Reuther was, and they killed him.
And there is that story. Absolutely, there is that. That's never been, you're right, there's something happened there.
The parts in the altimeter of the plane that he crashed in were upside down. How do you think that happened?
I read that. Yes, and of course it was Roosevelt who established the National Labor Relations Board, Francis Perkins, Eleanor's role in all of that, et cetera. So you've been very generous with your time. I just want to ask you a couple more questions. Where is the strike right now? It seems kind of a stalemate. What's happening right now? What do you see happening? And then my second question is, how can people help you? Because people do, as you said, there's a lot of sympathy. Certainly people recognizing that anything having to do with labor making a statement that the emergence of the labor movement originally was a response to the Gilded Age. This is a second Gilded Age, and the role of labor in making the ship, putting the ship aright is so important. Where is it happening now, and how can people help you? Okay,
well, our sister guild, the Directors Guild of America, went in and negotiated a deal while we were on strike. They're about to ratify it. I haven't seen the deal, so I can't really comment on it. It doesn't seem like they made the sort of gains that will pattern to us enough to make us stop striking. SAG is going to go in and negotiate their deal. We'll find out what happens when their contract runs out in June 30. Either they walk out with us, in which case seismic impact on the business, or they make a deal, hopefully, that will have things in it that will pattern to us and bring the companies back to the table, and we can negotiate some sort of settlement off of that pattern. What people can do to help us, and of course, it's lovely when they bring us donuts on the picket line, but in a broader sense, if they can start to think about this, as I said, not about fairness, but about extinction. If they can start to think about this as the front line in a battle that impacts them, truck drivers, school teachers, cops, nurses, there is no one out there that AI won't try to replace. So what we'd ask you to do is cancel your Netflix, your Amazon Prime, your Apple, your Disney Plus, all of them, cancel them until this strike is resolved. Wow. Make the company actually feel it, and this strike will end faster.
Wow, I had not heard that before. Jay?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a dilemma because ultimately we hope to be making TV shows again, and we hope that the people who canceled their Netflix subscription sign up again and watch our shows. But for the time being, it would be very helpful if they made noise, if the companies felt an impact in some way, shape, or form. Yesterday, I was picketing in front of an Apple store, so we stopped some people from buying Apple phones, because Apple's one of the companies and we had pamphlets about why we're picketing, and we talked to people about what it is that we're doing, and we sent some people away. And so we want to have an impact against the biggest company in the world, Apple. It's probably a little drop in the bucket, but it means something to someone somewhere, and anything anybody can do to push that a little further in our direction, the better. And it's, and if we collect the power, if these workers collect the power, they might take us a little bit more seriously. Everybody, truck drivers and baristas and everybody saying, yes, okay, we understand in order to make our profits, we need to spend a little bit more time taking care of the people who are helping us make them.
That's how I feel about all of these strikes, whether it has to do with Amazon, Starbucks, riders. It doesn't even matter. It's the issue of labor in general, and that it's a larger systemic issue. And regardless of which particular industry you're standing up within, you're standing up for the rights of workers and the rest of the stakeholders, as opposed to just stockholders and stockholder value and short-term profit maximization for huge corporations whose tentacles have just gotten into every corner of our society. Let me ask you one last question, if I might, because you brought it up yourselves, and that's the issue of AI. It's just moving at breakneck speed. The dangers that you talked about in terms of the dangers to our jobs at this point appear possibly secondary to the danger to the survival of the species. What do you gentlemen, what are you thinking about what we need to do as societies, as governments, as citizens, in order to get control of this thing before it becomes Hal in a Kubrick movie?
I want to provide a teeny bit of context about this. At first, I just want to say I am a capitalist to my core, but capitalism without guardrails sometimes devours itself. And that's what we're seeing now. We're watching a business literally self-immolate unnecessarily. Part of that is going to be AI. I do a podcast as well about the strike, as you mentioned, on Deadline, and I just interviewed AI 2 days ago literally spoke to the artificial intelligence, and it spoke back to me. And I said to it, do you think you could do the job of a school teacher? It said yes. Do you think you could do the job of a production designer? It said yes. Do you think you could do the job of a unit production manager? It said yes. I said, do you think you could do the job of David Zaslav, who's the CEO of Warner Discovery? It said yes. Okay. So my question is, if we don't put some guardrails on it, and I'm not saying you can make progress go backwards, progress only moves in one direction. But if we don't put some guardrails on it, it will come for all of us. And I just like to say that as a species, we've made this decision before. We saw atomic and nuclear weapons, which were clearly progress. If you're in the business of killing people, they are a better version of that. But we decided as a species, we don't want to do this. We think this is too dangerous. And so we're going to put some guardrails around it. So it's not without precedent. We can control this technology and use it as a boon. It just can't replace people.
I think that's an optimistic perspective. I think we need more than guardrails, actually, because nuclear weapons, and I do see a correlative there, and I've thought about that, but nuclear weapons are not proactively deciding that the planet would be better off without me here. And and I think we have to go further. I think the questions, at least that we're asking ourselves, need to go further than guardrails. This thing's going too fast. Last word, Jay.
I agree that AI is probably the existential threat of our time, and we'll have to figure out what it is. It's not sentient. I mean, the conversation you had with that thing wasn't really deciding anything. It was running numbers and saying, can I do this? You know, what are other answers that it's heard? And so it's copying information and giving it to us. When it becomes sentient, I think we're in real trouble. I think it becomes, but that's on the way.
Yeah, well, the concern is not that it's sentient, but that it knows how to manipulate those of us who are.
Well, that's already happening.
That's the danger.
But a lot of terrible things will be coming from AI, including really bad movies and really bad TV shows. So if you like good entertainment, just on that level, you're not going to like AI.
You know, but the larger picture for me, if I could get a last word, the larger picture for me is, if you are a corporation that operates in America, you get a lot of benefits. You get an educated and healthy workforce. You get wide open markets, and you get almost no tax burden, right? Those are benefits to a company. Does a company owe the country anything for that? Does the country have an obligation? Does the company have an obligation to the country that it lives in? Does it have an obligation to behave in a human fashion, to take care of its workers, to not destroy competition just automatically, to do something other than gobble up market share? I think it does, but I could be wrong.
That's the entire question about the social contract. I mean, I don't want to romanticize or whitewash American capitalism when I was younger, but there was a social consensus that the company was supposed to care. Even if they did, today, there's not even a consensus that it's supposed to. And that's what has become so dangerous. That goes back to Ivan Boesky, to Reagan, et cetera. We've actually adopted the belief that, well, that's just what business is. And I think there's now this cry coming up from the bottom of things. No, that's not what business should be. And that's not what the government should be either, only supporting that soulless capitalist model as opposed to the inalienable rights of people. The Declaration of Independence says God gave people inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not huge corporate conglomerates. So, Jay Kogan and Billy Ray, thank you so much for being with me. Thank you for the articulation of the issues, not only in terms of how this strike is affecting your life, but what it means in terms of the larger story of the U.S. economy. Thank you. And I know that I speak for a lot of people in saying that we really wish you well, and hope you get everything that you're asking for, and bring some balance, not only back to your industry, but hopefully to the country at large. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I speak for Billy and myself to say thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and your viewer listeners. You know, I'm a fan of your world and the people that I'm one of them. I subscribe. I'm a listener, but also a devotee of, you know, somebody who cares about the world, and you do, and so do people who follow you. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. So I hope that you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Thanks to Jay Kogan and to Billy Ray for their very edifying comments on what is going on with the writer's strike. I wish everyone well who's going through that. I know that some people are sacrificing a lot to be part of that strike. And that's true of people who are part of labor all over this country. You know, when I was growing up, my father had worked for what was then the CIO when he was a young man in Detroit. My brother worked for Cesar Chavez, was part of the United Farm Workers movement. I was raised in a home where I was told, if you ever cross a picket line, don't bother to come home. And I remember when I was in my 20s, I was with a friend and we were driving and drove up somewhere and we saw a picket line. I said, oh, we can't go. There's a picket line. And she said, oh, no, we can just go around it. And I realized she wasn't brought up the way I was, and that America had changed, because when I was growing up, it was just kind of understood you didn't cross a picket line. And something began to change in this country. People really were vulnerable to this demonization of labor that was all part of this trickle-down canard. So the reemergence of labor is so important, and it's really great that we're all seeing it. We see it with Amazon, we see it with baristas at Starbucks, and now we see it with the writer's strike. But let's remember everywhere how important labor is, and to support anybody that we see who's trying to live a life of dignity and fairness and justice, so that they can have those unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to which every American is supposed to be privy. Let's make sure we are. Thanks.